My name is Rafael, you're watching Marco Garage, and today I'm going to show you which are the less successful Black Sabbath albums and the best-selling ones. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave your comment below, tell me what you think, if you like these records or not, okay? Let's start. Well, Black Sabbath is my favorite band, so I love all these albums, really. All these albums have good stuff. And we're going to start from the one that, according to chart masters, sold less copies than all the others. And number 19 is Forbidden, released in 1995. Well, at that time, it sold an estimated amount of more than 410,000 copies. It was 1995, and the band was formed by Tony Martin on vocals, Tony Iommi guitar, Cozy Powell drums, Neil Murray bass, and Jeff Nichols keyboards. And it was produced by the Body Count guitarist. And you know, it's an album that was remixed recently by Tony Iommi, and I think the remixed version is really good. You should check it out. There's some good stuff in it, but sadly didn't sold a lot of copies at the time. We move to number 18, which is the previous album before Forbidden, which was Cross Purposes, released in 1994, and it sold more than 510,000 copies. At the time, the band was formed by Tony Martin, Tony Iommi, Bobby Rodinelli on drums, Geezer Butler on bass, and Jeff Nichols on keyboards. And an interesting thing about this album is that there's a song called Evil Eye, which was co-written with Eddie Van Halen. Yes, Eddie was a good friend of Tony Iommi. He was a big fan of Black Sabbath. And we already talked about this in other videos, so if you want to see more, you can go here and watch this video where I told you that Van Halen was almost named Rat Salad, which is a famous instrumental track from Paranoid. We move to number 17, which is the album Tear, released in 1990. It's another album with Tony Martin on vocals. At the time, besides Tony Iommi, the band had Cozy Powell on drums, Neil Murray on bass, and Jeff Nichols on keyboards. It sold an estimated amount of 610,000 copies. Number 16, The Eternal Idol, released in 1987. It sold an estimated amount of 620,000 copies. It had also Tony Martin on vocals, Tony Iommi, and Jeff Nichols on keyboards. And curiously, it had Bob Daisley on bass. Bobby, who played before with Ozzy Osbourne and was Ozzy's primary lyricist when he was part of the band. He worked extensively with Ozzy, and he wrote most of the lyrics for Ozzy in the 80s and in the 90s a little bit too. And another interesting part of the band at the time was the drummer Eric Singer, who later on would become the Catman, the drummer for Kiss. And he even was part of the Kiss for more than 20 years, and he was the drummer during this final reunion of this final tour of Kiss, the farewell tour that happened in 2023. We move to number 15, which is Headless Cross, released in 1989, and it sold an estimated amount of 740,000 copies. The band had Tony Martin, Tony Iommi, Cozy Powell, Lawrence Coty on bass, and Jeff Nichols on keyboards. Number 14, which is a very underrated album, I really like this album, and is Seven Star, released in 1986. It had more than 90,000 copies sold, and at the time the band had Glenn Hughes as the vocalist. Glenn Hughes, who was famous for being part of Trapeze before, and then obviously he was Roger Glover's replacement on Deep Purple, when the band also had David Coverdale as the vocalist, and at the time, on Seven Star, the band had Glenn Hughes, Tony Iommi, Eric Singer on drums, Dave Spitz on bass, and Jeff Nichols on keyboards. Jeff Nichols was like Sabbath's fifth member from the 80s on, right? And he was a really important part of the band, for sure. Number 13, released in 1992, The Humanizer, which was the reunion album with Ronnie James Dio and Vinny Appice. They left the band after Mob Rules and they reunited in 1992, but so you had that classic formation of Mob Rules again back with Dio, Appice, Geezer, and Tony Iommi, but it didn't last that long because the band accepted to be Ozzy Osbourne's opening act one night, and Dio refused to do that, and then later on he ended up leaving the band again with Appice. We moved to number 12, which is I'm sorry, I didn't say The Humanizer. The Humanizer sold an estimated amount of more than 1 million copies. Number 12 is Black Sabbath's final studio album, 13, released in 2013, which is the reunion album that sold an estimated amount of 1.2 million copies. And I think is a very underrated album. It's a great record. There's so many great songs, so many great guitar solos, great lyrics. It's a great album in my opinion. And you had again Ozzy, Tony, and Geezer, but sadly the band didn't had Bill Ward, who originally would be part of the tour, but he ended up going away. He didn't agree with the financial part of it, and that's what he says, and the other part says that he wouldn't be physically able to play and tour with the band. And sadly, it was the Rage Against the Machine drummer Brad Wilk who played on this album with the band, and during their tour it was Ozzy's drummer Tommy Clufitos who played the drums. And we move to the next album. Number 11 is Born Again, released in 1983. It sold an estimated amount of 1.4 million copies sold, and it was the final album, the drummer Bill Ward, final studio album that the drummer Bill Ward recorded with Black Sabbath. And you had he had left the band after Heaven and Hell, and Vinny Appice replaced him on Mob Rules. And later on in 1983, he rejoined the band and he recorded Born Again with Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and the Deep Purple vocalist Ian Gillan, who was part of the band at that time. And I think it's a very underrated album who should be remixed sometime in the future, who knows. It's a good album. And we moved to number 10. We reached the top 10 of the 10 best-selling Black Sabbath albums, and number 10 is Never Say Die, released in 1978, the final album with Ozzy Osbourne on vocals before he was fired, the final album until 2013 when he recorded 13 with the band. And Never Say Die sold an estimated amount of more than 1.4 million and 20,000 copies sold, and sold a little bit more than Born Again, according to Chartmasters. And we move to number 9, which is Technical Ecstasy, released in 1976. It sold almost 1.5 million copies, and at the time the band had that classic formation of Ozzy, Tony, Bill, and Geezer. And I think it's a very underrated Black Sabbath album as well. And Technical Ecstasy, there's an interesting thing about that record because it has the track "It's Alright," which is one of the two Black Sabbath songs which had Bill Ward on vocals. It's a great ballad. We already recorded a video about that as well, and if you want to know more about it, you can go here and watch, or in the description you're gonna see which are these two songs that Bill Ward was the vocalist. And we move to number 8. And number 8 is Mob Rules, released in 1981, the second album with Ronnie James Dio on vocals and the first one with Vinny Appice on drums. It sold an estimated amount of 1.9 million copies, and I think it's one of the best Black Sabbath albums for sure. It's one of my favorites. I love the Dio era, and it's certainly fantastic. If you haven't heard that, you should definitely check it out. And we move to number 7. Number 7 was released in 1975, and it's Sabotage, a very underrated Black Sabbath record as well. It's got Symptom of the Universe, It's got many other great tracks, many other fantastic songs, and you know, it's one of my favorites as well. If you haven't heard that album, you should check it out. And it sold more than 2.5 million copies. And we moved to number 6, which is Heaven and Hell, released in 1980. It sold an estimated amount of 3.4 million copies, and it was a rebirth for Black Sabbath. After they fired Ozzy, and nobody knew what would happen, and they invited the previous Rainbow vocalist Ronnie James Dio to join the band, and it was a really successful album, and I think it's one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time for sure, and it's just fantastic. If you haven't heard that album, you should definitely check it out. And we move to the top 5 now. Number 5 is Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, released in 1973. It sold an estimated amount of more than 4 million copies. And it's one of the greatest Black Sabbath albums. You know, it's one of those 4 albums the band released. They're all classics. They're all fantastic. They're packed with incredible songs, and they really define what heavy metal was about, in my opinion. And number 4 is Volume 4, released in 1972. It sold an estimated amount of 4.1 million copies. And you know, you got on that album Supernaut, you got Snowblind, and many other incredible tracks. It's a fantastic record, and it's one of my favorites as well. And we move to the top 3. Number 3, Master of Reality, released in 1971. It sold more than 4.8 million copies. It's just a classic. You got Children of the Grave, you got After Forever, you got many other great tracks, and it's certainly Black Sabbath on their peak. It's a fantastic album. As I said, all those first albums were untouchable. They're fantastic. And number 2, the second best Black Sabbath selling album is Black Sabbath, the band's self-titled groundbreaking debut album, released in 1970, which was recorded only in a few hours. It's just mind-blowing. And it sold an estimated amount of 4.9 million copies. And you know, you got The Warning, you got the title track, you've got NIB, you got The Wizard, so many incredible songs, A Wicked World. It's such a great classic album, and you know, that cover, and it's the album that created heavy metal music, so come on, what can I say more about it? And the best-selling Black Sabbath album that you probably already knew which one was it, is Paranoid, released in 1970, the band's second album, and it sold an estimated amount of 9.9 million copies. And obviously you had Paranoid, you had Iron Man, you had War Pigs, you had Rat Salad, Fairies Wear Boots, many other incredible songs. You know, it's just certainly one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. And you know, what can I say? Black Sabbath is my favorite band, and there's nothing more I can say about this incredible band. And if you're not really a big fan of Black Sabbath, give it a chance, man. You know, hear all these albums, and I'm positive, I'm really sure that you're gonna like them. They're the greatest band of all time, heavy metal band of all time, in my opinion. Tell me what you think. Please comment the video, like the video if you liked, and subscribe to the channel. And of course, visit rockandrollgarage.com. You can go to the description and read more about this, okay? Thank you for watching, and I see you later.